The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jeremy Lundgren. He is the president of Nicolet Bible Institute in northern Wisconsin, and he also is an instructor of theology at Wheaton College. And he's written a book called The Pursuit of Safety, A Theology of Danger, Risk, and Security. And we're going to be talking about that topic today, and I'm just really excited about this because this is such an interesting theological topic that I don't think gets enough coverage. So, Jeremy, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks, James. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, I actually looked into doing a theology of risk at one point in my doctoral work, and thought this would be the coolest thing ever, and then ended up doing something on collective remembering and sort of set the risk part aside. So I was really excited to kind of see your book. And I was like, oh, somebody did it. This is great. I think it's so needed. But give me a sense of why choose this topic? Like, what was it about this topic that drew you in?
Yeah, there were a couple things kind of earlier in my life. One of the vivid memories I have, I tell this story often, is I think it was like the first year of my marriage. My wife and I, we lived in the San Diego area, drove past an elementary school, and it said, "Have a safe summer." And I just made the joke to my wife, like, how many 12-year-old boys are there? Like, last day of school, I'm really pumped. I really hope my summer is, and then like fill in the blank. Fun, adventurous, awesome. But then, what do the teachers and the moms want? They want the kids to have a safe summer. So I just made a little joke. I poked at it, just thinking through, like, is that really like the ideal that we want for kids? And we do. We love our kids. We want them to be safe. But then when you constantly have that message, it's saying something to kids. It's saying this is more important than trying something dangerous. This is more important than being stretched or growing or getting hurt and learning how to get back up. Things along those lines. So, I don't know who the principal of that school was or what it meant, but it's a pretty common thing that we do. And then my wife and I were missionaries in Kazakhstan for a couple years. And while we were there, just noticed, oftentimes when you go to a different culture, you notice things about your own culture, just by way of contrast. And so just noticing in America, the amount of signage, the amount of messaging that we have about safety and things like that just isn't there. And you could talk about our legal structure and insurance and laws and lawyers, right, so along those lines. But it was just, it was noticeably absent, and it was on my mind. And so that got me going. I did my master's of theology at Talbot School of Theology. And that's kind of where I first started thinking about the idea, something related to safety, maybe risk, something along those lines, and just started pursuing that, started studying it. As you mentioned, just finding that there weren't a lot of, books or people that were addressing this topic from a theological perspective. You found some stuff on like missions, why we as Christians ought to be willing to take risk. But I really wanted to, I spent a lot of time kind of looking historically at why we think about safety in the way that we do, why we pursue it in the way that we do. And so kind of looking back at kind of some broad societal and cultural developments that get us to where we're at today. So that's a very brief overview of kind of how I got into that topic.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think it's interesting. As I read through the book, one of the, it's the first chapter, but Tokens of Safety, I thought that was a really interesting way to sort of bring us into this topic. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, just to give people an entree into safety, tokens of safety, what you're really talking about there.
Yeah. So again, kind of using that tool of evaluating the culture by looking, like someone that came from the outside, and they would look at that and they would say, what stands out here? What do I notice? And if you were to go to, for us as Americans, go to another another culture and somewhere where there's another religion being practiced, we might notice, oh, there are a lot of religious tokens, or there are a lot of, what do those things hanging mean, or what are these little amulets, or whatever those things are. So that's why I use the word token, kind of in that sense of an outsider coming to America would look and say, there's all these signs that have similar coloring and similar symbols, whatever those represent. That must be something really important to this culture. And so you look at it and you notice that it's related to physical safety. And so you say, and again, that's something that is common to all cultures, that we have ways of noticing dangers or communicating with each other about dangers. But I just thought this is a way to highlight that this is something very important in our culture. And at least to just say, let's not take this as a given. Let's not say that's just the way it ought to be, but let's ask some questions and say, how important is safety? How does it rank related to other good things?
Yeah, and as you looked at it sort of through history, you do deal with a lot of the inherent risk of life, I suppose we could say.
Right.
And so maybe help us think through, I don't know whether balance is the right word, but the relationship, maybe the trade-off between danger and risk, between danger, risk, and safety, something like that.
Boy, well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, we live in a fallen world. I have fun with my students. I'll ask them questions about, could Adam and Eve have like accidentally tripped and fallen or injured themselves in Eden or something like that. And so when we look at so the fact that we have dangers, the Psalms talk a lot about how death encroaches on us, or other things, hunger and thirst and enemies are coming after us. And so I think we have to take that theologically as just a constant reminder that we're sinners, that we're guilty before God, that we live under, apart from Christ, Hebrews says that people live under the fear of death. And so obviously that's the big one when we think about navigating things or taking risks is, and I say that, and maybe this is like going too extreme, but I say that because you start boiling things back, and what am I willing to risk, and what am I not willing to risk, and what do I do if I lose this thing that is important to me, whether it's wealth or material goods, whether it's an injury to yourself or someone you care about, but the ultimate thing that we are worried about is death. And so Jesus talks about that, where we look at a life following him, and he just goes right there and he says, do not fear those who can destroy the body, but after that of nothing more they can do. Fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. It's very rare though that on an everyday life that we face these matters of life and death in kind of a total sense. But then we can also think about some things are more life-giving, and some things lead to life, and some things lead away from life. They lead to death. And so we have to think about the things that we're doing. Are they good? Are we okay with the cost that might be involved? So on a very practical example, which I think is where your question was going originally, was just like, I don't know, like how far do you let your kids go off to play? That might be a good example, right?
Yeah.
Because you say, well, they can go in the front yard, but they need to, don't go cross the curb into the street, or they can be on our street, but don't go around the corner, or whatever it is for the kids. We're thinking about those things because we want our kids to have some level of freedom. We want them to hang out and play with the kids down the street, all those sorts of things. And so how you figure that out exactly, that there's no formula for it, but we look and we say, I want my kids to grow up and to be competent, to live in this world, to be able to do things, to overcome difficulties. So yeah, it does take wisdom and figuring out just kind of like where we draw those lines. It's hard though.
Let me ask, so I teach a course for Wheaton in their leadership program. And one of the things I talk about with leaders is this idea of the worst case scenario. When they're in leadership, you're trying to figure out, you're in a complex scenario, you're trying to make a a good decision. It's like you might consider, well, what's the worst case scenario here?
Right.
And so I said, I think I usually talk to him about, we need to think about the worst case scenarios on multiple levels, right? You've got the worst case scenarios for the organization and just strictly for the organization. It's not theological, it's not philosophical. Like, we parse these things out, right? I suppose in reality we can't, but for the purposes of instruction, it works. So yeah, there's organizational worst case scenario. And it's like, the organization loses all its money and has to, lay off all its employees and it goes out of business. That maybe that's the worst case scenario. But from a biblical and theological perspective, there's another worst case scenario, which is maybe something like succeeding by not being loyal to Christ, or being able to continue in disobedience, instead of pointing to and glorifying God, right? Something that would be like the sort of basic betrayal of our faith is really the worst case scenario that even as leaders in organizations, we have to be cognizant of, that there is a way for us to dishonor God in all of this. And so as I was reading your book, I was thinking about that sort of approach to this. And you sit back and you say, well, is there a fundamental category of risk where we sit back and say, our vulnerabilities always put us at risk of being disloyal to God. And so how do we cultivate a safety in that sort of deep vulnerability in a broken year? What does that even look like? And so I was wondering if you had any sort of take on that.
So I think what I hear you saying is, because there are vulnerabilities, whether it's organizational or professional or even personal, that there's this temptation, that those vulnerabilities cause us to be tempted to somehow compromise on our theology, compromise on our core commitment to Christ.
That's right. I mean, I think we see this in the Old Testament, for instance. Maybe you put it in, even in the garden, you don't exactly have vulnerabilities there, but the decision seems to be that we want to be like God. We want to elevate from our current position to this new position. You probably see it more in something like a Genesis 11:1-9, Tower of Babel narrative, where they don't want to be skeptics, right? They want to be together. And so in order to be together, we take these steps, and these steps end up being really in a friction with what God would want. You see what I'm...
Yeah. It's interesting how you put it, because the title of the book, The Pursuit of Safety, came as I was writing it. I just was using that phrase a lot.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in my mind, it had kind of a negative sense to it, because I was trying to describe what our world does. And I just wanted to say, we want to be safe, but apart from God, when are we truly safe? But we're pursuing this thing, and can we ever get to it? And so as I think about those vulnerabilities that we have, those temptations that we have, which, as you say, those are actually the dangers to pursue safety apart from God. And so you're asking, like, how do we stop that? How do we see our safety in relationship to God is where my mind went. And yeah, in the Old Testament, you see that so much with idolatry. That's one of the very common frameworks is, why did Israel go after those idols? Because they wanted rain for their crops, because they wanted to be successful in war, because they had fleshly desires that they, the law of God prohibited, but they could indulge in those things with these other gods. And so there were those other things that they desired, and over again, they wouldn't trust in God. And I think about in Isaiah, there are a number of verses that say those who trust in the Lord, or those who wait on the Lord, won't be put to shame. And so that's what I think, that's what a positive thing, that's what we need to be building up in our lives, is to say, I am vulnerable as a creature. I am vulnerable, because I'm a sinner, who's been redeemed, but still I'm in this corruptible body, this body that, can be harmed. And the possessions I have, the things I use in this world, moth and rust can destroy them. And so that attitude of the heart of going to God and saying, I'm going to wait on you. I'm going to trust in you.
Yeah. So I think I really started thinking about this idea that I just sort of threw out there in the chapter on ordering creation, talking there about technology, idols, and the cross of Christ. And you just think about those three things together. And I mean, my mind was going all over the place in that chapter because, you have something like building a parapet around the top of your house, right? I mean, we see this in the legal literature. And it's like, well, that's a form of technology that we're using now to develop a safety.
In times like these, we all need a word of encouragement. From pastor and best-selling author Max Lucado comes the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast. With over 40 years of ministry and more than 145 million books sold in 50 languages, Max shares the greatest story ever told, the living Savior who brings hope for a lifetime. Through rich biblical insight, heartfelt storytelling, you'll be reminded that God is always near, always for you, and always in you. Listen to the Max Lucado Encouraging Word podcast, where hope meets your day. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
Net, so to speak, so that people don't fall off the house. Right. I mean, you have appropriate uses for this stuff, but then you also have extremely inappropriate uses for this stuff. And so I appreciate you saying, like, it comes back to wisdom, but I'd be interested to hear you talk even a little bit about how you think through technology from a risk and safety perspective. And then maybe we can talk back on what you do in that chapter with the cross of Christ.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read much of Jacques Ellul. He talks about Cain and the city that he builds, and I don't agree with everything that Ellul says, but he gets your mind, your imagination going and thinking through what was Cain trying to do in building the city. There's the textual irony there that he went to the land of wandering to establish himself. It's just a great, like, sociological and psychological and then fundamentally spiritual insight to say, you're cast out of the presence of God. You murder your brother. There's some pride and some hubris involved in that. And then Cain becomes the forefather of all these early technologies. You read his genealogy,
Yes.
and his descendants are known for basics in agriculture and technology and music and things along those lines, things which aren't inherently evil, but there's some sense in which humanity's earliest development of technology is, you think about it on just a very primal level of you need food and shelter and things like that. Confession, I watched a couple of YouTube videos about, like, architecture and designing houses. And the lady talks about how we love to be, when you go to a restaurant or a coffee shop, you want to sit in the corner because it makes you feel safe. And a lot of little things like that. And interesting, it's so true that technology, we oftentimes with technology, we can't get past, like, the glowy screen and the flashy lights. We just say, what is this thing doing to my heart? And, I mean, it does a lot of things to our hearts, related to our relationships with other people, our needs to feel important and efficient and all those things.
Yeah.
So when it comes to safety, you just say the technology, whatever it is, if it's a parapet wall 1,000 years ago, if it's, a seatbelt 100 years ago, or if it's an airbag and the automatic braking systems and all the sensors today, like, what is that thing promising you? What is it giving you? And it's giving you at least some perception of control of the physical world around you.
Okay.
And again, you go back to Cain, and he didn't want to trust God, right? He wanted to go out, do it on his own, without trusting God. And I think Ellul is right that in our quest for technology, that's not all that technology is, but there are certainly remnants of that in what we're doing. Like what are we chasing when we're building these things? I almost asked this question in a sermon I preached recently at a church, but I wanted to ask the question. You think about our phones, the tracking, and for families, like if you're a mom and you got your kids, you can find my phone or whatever. And I just wanted to ask the question. So I'll ask this question for the audience. Since you've gotten that feature, are you less anxious or more anxious? Right? Because
You know what I am.
10 years ago, when Life 360 was becoming the thing, or more than that, what was it promising you? It was promising you, where are my kids right now? What are they doing? And it was going to take away that anxiety. And so that's my question. Are you less anxious or more anxious? You said you know your answer. I'm curious what it is.
Well, I'd say my answer is so we got Life 360, and as a Gen Xer, right, who grew up with the public service ads that said it's 10 o'clock to know where your children are. All right, you remember those? I'm looking at this thing going, this is nuts, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so early on, I was kind of tracking the kids all over the place. And then my son got in a car accident. Nobody was really hurt, but he gets in an accident. And you all of a sudden realize that the only thing this thing is good for is completely reactive, right? If he's hurt,
Stop that accident.
I can't do anything, right? I can only get to where he is a few minutes faster. And so I kind of stopped using it unless I want the kids to stop by the store or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
But I early on, I could definitely feel it's like, oh man, where are they? What are they doing with it? And now I just kind of use it as, this could be convenient for me if they're out and about close to somewhere that I need something, I'm going to ask them to pick it up. But I can definitely say it would drive me crazy if I wasn't. But I think it was my son's accident where I just kind of sat back and I'm like, this thing isn't keeping anybody's, right? It was only allowing me to react a little bit quicker than I would have. And the reality was, when I got there on my son's accident, the cop's already there. There are people who are handling it. I'm just now there as sort of emotional support, and that's it. So, yeah, I think we've gone a little overboard with some of it, but
yeah, my daughter got into an accident recently.
There you go.
And again, not really hurt, did some damage to another kid's car. And the funny thing with that was that her phone sensed she was in an accident, and then there were some sort of safety settings that we didn't set up and we didn't really know what they were doing. So it called another teenage friend of hers, a guy that was somehow her default emergency contact. And then her phone was, as she's sitting there recovering, the phone was just blasting, "You've been in an accident. You've been in an accident," or something like that. And she's trying to turn it off and the battery's almost dead. And it was, and then her friend's wondering, "Why are you calling me?" So she's dealing with all that stuff. And, those questions are worth asking. Are you less anxious now because of it? And I think it reveals a lot of important things. It reveals that we have an ability as people, as families, as cultures, to take new technology. And the way I describe it in the book is, technology at first kind of shocks you, it overwhelms you, and it's this new strange thing, and we're afraid of it, but we're also drawn to it. And then it just becomes normal. When we talk about technology, we usually mean screens and devices like that today. I don't mean the chair that I'm sitting on or shoelaces or anything, though that's technology, but that's just, we've incorporated that, so we're used to it.
Yeah.
So it shows us that, that we have this emotional response to technology. It also shows us that we can manage it. I liked what you said about, you could let it, Life 360 stress you out if you wanted to. So it shows, okay, you've got some level of control over that. You don't have to be, controlled by it. You can exercise wisdom, take some control. So when we think about technology and safety, that's one of the themes that I was thinking a lot about was, what do we do with the promises that technology makes? You can think of lots of ironic examples of technology that makes one thing safer and three other things more dangerous. And what do you do with those things, and how do we navigate those things? But it's just, I don't know. I would encourage all of us to not be under impressed with technology.
Yeah. I've always kind of thought
Good for our
about
hearts.
technology, and I think especially in those Cain narratives, you look at those, maybe even the fig leaf and the skin coverings that God gives,
Right.
early, just a chapter before, but as a response to brokenness, technology is a response to brokenness. And so with Cain, he is pushed out of this, from before the face of God, given the mark so that nobody kills him. But now he's also been alienated from the land. But God tells him that the land is not going to yield the fruit that it used to for him. And so he's got to find a whole different way of life. And it's almost like, well, there's no real big surprise that technology was one of the solutions that he ends up with, that he goes and builds this city, that his family develops these technologies through their ages. He's sent out in a very vulnerable position. And I guess that'd be my next question is, how do you really see, when you're talking about risk and vulnerability, are those two sides of the same coin? Like, are they really synonyms, or would you distinguish anything between those two?
Yeah, the word vulnerable, the root of that just means woundable, that you're able to be wounded. And then with risk, the kind of the earlier usage of the word risk implied that there was something to gain. So usually when we talk about being vulnerable, it's just the fact that you have, metaphorically an underbelly, right? They're soft spots.
Yeah.
We often use that word more often in a relational or emotional sense.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable with each other. But I think that people will make arguments that it's good to be vulnerable with other people because there are gains to be made because of it. So in that sense, you could say you're taking a risk where you're saying, I'm going to put myself out there with this other person, or maybe in a more physical sense of I'm exposing myself to a possible infection, or if you pick up someone stranded on the side of the road, you're making yourself vulnerable to,
right.
Who is this person and what might he do? But you're saying there are things to be gained for it, of showing kindness to this person that needs help. So you're willing to put yourself in something of a vulnerable situation. And then with risk, we often think about it as, take the risk, and you can't win if you don't play type thing. Though oftentimes risk is often used more as a synonym just for danger, where you don't necessarily have that. What's the thing that can be gained when you take a risk? It's more like, that's a risk, be careful. Just that's something that can harm you. So that's a little. I spent a lot of time kind of parsing those words and looking how they're used. Yeah.
What do you see as I know you cover the late modern risk in the book, but what do you see today as our big risks?
Oh boy. I was finishing writing this during COVID, so that was on my mind a lot.
It was easy to identify then.
Yeah. I had written most of it before that, but was kind of finishing up and editing it kind of during that time frame. So that was the one issue that was on my mind. And obviously there are a lot of politics involved in those things as well. And, so that was a snapshot of how we as a society, how we just look at, how dangerous is this thing? What do we need to do? All those sorts of things. I don't think I have anything, groundbreaking or notes to say about COVID in particular. But what are our risks today? I think a lot about children. I think a lot and young adults. I work here at Nicolay Bible Institute with 18 to 24-year-olds, and just looking at their lives a lot. And probably the thing that's the biggest on my heart is our unwillingness to let them take risks and experience real consequences for things. And we do that under this idea of protecting them and helping them develop. But then I look at people, I think of young men, they're hungry to be challenged. They want to be pushed. They want to be stretched. I see a lot of guys rise to the occasion with that. So that's one of the big things that concerns me, is how the older generation is kind of trying to protect younger people, but in doing so, cutting them off from developing and growing and learning how to, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen rarely happens, but something bad happens. And okay, so how do you get up? How do you overcome that? I think about that a lot.
Yeah. Do you think, when you think about risks throughout the ages, obviously there are some of these that are going to be like physical risks. And I just finished up talking to a guy about the German Reformation. And he's like, in Martin Luther's day, basically people are just dying right in front of you. The physical risk of just life, infant mortality, illness, plague, all those things. Those are real, tangible risks sitting right in front of you. But then you also have sort of what we might call the symbolic risk, right? That's present within the institutions of the day, which were selling of indulgences and being taken advantage of by an institution that really should have been for you, but ended up being against you, and having sort of an ignorance of what's going on simply because you don't read, you don't speak Latin, you don't, all these different things that were going on in that Reformation period. So you've got these two like sort of very tangible risk, but then you've got also this subversive risk. Right. Do you see that across? I'm sure you see it across all periods, but I'm kind of wondering how you think about is that a distinction that matters?
No, that's really good. It makes me think of when Jesus says that life is more than food and the body is more than clothing.
Yeah.
And you think, well, what is it then? And on that physical level, where there's, in the 1500s, where there's infant mortality, there are diseases and things like that. And those are the sicknesses of the body. Those are the life and death things. And those things are so important. And they have a way of shouting at you when things are going on that level. And Jesus says, no, life is more than this, right? And so what is that more? And so when you're talking about some of those symbolic risks, I think that we could look at those things and say that's pointing to the more, whatever Jesus is talking about when he says life is more than clothing, the body. And now I'm misquoting Jesus, but whatever the more is there, and it's God gives us life, but what is this life for? What is its purpose? What is its teleology, or its telos? Where is it going? And one of the criticisms that we can make of the current age that we live in is that we don't have an end. We don't give any goals for our young people to pursue, even like within this life, right? You could say the 70 to 80 years that God gives you on this earth, there's an arc to that. There are creational goods. There are careers and families and things that you can be doing, sacrifices that are worth making, discipline, risks that you can take just within the horizon of time of the days on this earth. And we don't even give young people that so often. And I think that people want to know, like I'm preserving my life, but what am I saving it for? What, like I want to spend my life. I want to use my life. So if I'm saving it now, what is it for? And then obviously for us as Christians, we look beyond the horizon of death. We look beyond the horizon of time to say we want to take risks. We want to be pushing for the age to come as well. And we need to give that to young people. We need to encourage them. We need to always match that with wisdom. I know people get concerned that then you're going to have just kind of foolish danger. And Proverbs talks a lot about that, right? The fool that just walks into trouble, and we don't want that. That's not what we're trying to encourage. We are trying to encourage people to step out in a world where we don't know the future, we don't know what tomorrow holds, where we take actions and we don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. But safety says you always want to know what the outcome is going to be before you do the thing.
So, I mean, I'm going to try to pull a couple of strands together of this conversation,
Sure.
right? So I know you got a chapter in the book on discipleship. You mentioned working with young people and these young men who are yearning.
And oftentimes, you're chasing happiness, but you don't know that God is the best way to achieve the happiness you're looking for. And so I was trying to end my suffering by sinning, but I only ended up sinning my way into more suffering.
That was Grammy winner Lecrae unpacking his testimony on The Walk, a podcast for worshipers. Join us weekly to hear artists, songwriters, worship leaders, filmmakers, and other creatives tell stories in the form of a devotional. The Walk can be found on lifeaudio.com or your favorite podcast platform.
For something more, a sense of adventure, a desire to be pushed, and then we've got this sort of symbolic risk kind of concept and this more than, clothing or more than food kind of idea. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I've been concerned with sort of lately that I see as a risk, I suppose, is like Andrew Tate.
Okay.
Right. So not them particularly. Okay. But in the vacuum where young men don't have that purpose and we're not giving them that purpose, people like Andrew Tate or even Christian versions of Andrew Tate, right, who call young men to machismo and bravado, and as opposed to calling them to discipleship, to me is a real risk. And so maybe talk through for me a little bit at how how you see the connection of discipleship being part of developing an appropriate understanding of safety and risk.
Yeah. I haven't consumed a lot of Andrew Tate content, but I've heard him described several times, basically how you did.
It's as bad as you think it is. Yeah. I don't watch it either, but it's, yeah.
You get it. Yeah. And so, yeah. So the concern is, what do we do with young guys in particular who are, I guess on the face of it, they would be, like not living godly lives, being disrespectful to women, being prideful, selfish thing. Is that kind of
it's sort of the tone, but I think and maybe the question is just this, like, I think we've got I think there is content out there within the Christian world that does something similar to what Andrew Tate is doing. And it's calling these young men to be masters of their domain in like sort of a, like I said, a machismo way. I don't know whether you ever watch pro wrestling, but, there used to be this guy who was oozing machismo, right? Like I can't remember, Razor Ramon, I think is what his name was. And, he'd come out and he was like this uber macho guy. And it feels like what we're pushing these many young men to is that machismo, right? It's not a real substance.
Yeah.
It's just almost like this facade of manliness as opposed to something more deeply rooted in discipleship. And so, we don't have to go the manhood route, but that's really more an example. But I guess my question is, how do we link up this notion of safety and risk to discipleship? Like, how do these things connect together? Do they emerge out of discipleship? So we begin to understand risk reward. We begin to understand, safety, danger. Like, how do you see those things fitting together? What's the role of discipleship maybe in developing a theology or?
Yeah. So discipleship, following Jesus, living a life like his. And it's an interesting topic. It's not one that I've connected to my book a lot. yeah, so I'm trying to think through, because I don't want to discourage young men from taking appropriate risks.
Right.
And I don't want to, like, I think, God created them male and female. There's masculinity and femininity. And so I want there to be good masculinity. And I don't know, people look at studies of whether men are more willing to take risks than women and things like that. So there's probably something to just the way men and women are created, or you look at the role of a mother with a young child and the role of a father. And so I want to be careful, like not to discourage like a good, healthy development of those things. Because I think that would be part of discipleship, where discipleship is being conformed to the image of Christ, following him to become whoever it is that God has made you to be. Yeah. And I talk in the book about the kind of the curriculum of discipleship, of how Jesus leads us through that, of dying to ourselves, taking up our cross and following him. And ultimately, right, those things aren't in conflict with each other. Being a leader, if God calls you to be a leader, while at the same time recognizing that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so, discipleship, it's taking this world, it's getting us back to the trajectory that we should have been on all along, as men and women created by God. And so sin, obviously, rebellion takes us off track from that. And in doing a theology of safety, I had a lot of people ask me early on, do you want to do like being saved or salvation or something like that? And I was always very insistent. No, I want to do safety. I want to look at our life in this physical world, physical safety on that level, because I think something like discipleship can instruct us on those things. And you read the Gospels, and obviously Jesus says, God, who can destroy body and soul, he's the one that you fear. You don't fear those who can destroy the body. And so there's eternal life, which is that ultimate thing that we're going for. But Jesus doesn't neglect earthly life. He just put it in its proper place. And so maybe to try and answer your question, I would say that I think discipleship is so important for how we take risks, how we interact with other people, the physical world around us, the machines and the technology that we operate and fix and engage with, and all those sorts of things, that there's a place in the curriculum of discipleship to say, here's how to do this appropriately.
Yeah. No, that's good. I know Jesus doesn't, I think there's a way to read Jesus that is way too selective and white. You say, well, the meek will inherit the earth, and so everybody should just be meek. Right. But at the end of the day, following Jesus was a risky activity. I mean, there's a reason the disciples ended up running away. At the end, it wasn't because they felt safe. And I think that, even that running away, you sort of recognize that almost as an immature necessity of risk assessment versus what you see the apostles doing in Acts, which is just, Stephen had to know he was getting stoned. These guys knew they were at risk of being put in jail, and they just took the risk. You know what I'm saying? Like you see a development in some of that across these books where you can really tell the disciples are coming into their own and recalculating these risks kind of as they go.
Yeah, I was actually this morning in my class, we were talking about how to read the Gospels. And I said, talking about the cross being central. And I said, you read the Gospels for the first time, and it looks like Jesus just fails because he says, take up your cross and follow me. And then at the moment where Jesus literally takes up his cross, they all stop following.
Right. They're out.
But Jesus knew that, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And then I said, you read the Gospels and then you get the end, the cross, the resurrection, and then you reread it again and you say, okay, Jesus is calling these disciples to follow him, knowing that they can't actually follow him. And then, you get to the book of Acts where the Holy Spirit gives them power. And then that's when you see those disciples laying down their lives as Jesus had done. And you say, oh, we need the cross in order to do that. Something I thought as you were talking about that was the way in which those, the apostles, those young Jewish disciples of Christ, you see with the Pharisees, you see with the Sanhedrin and the establishment, and then the Roman rulers as well with Paul, a lot of pressure for them to just kind of stay in their lane and do what they're supposed to do. And the salvation of the world is at stake, but we'd really like you to not be too disruptive to what we've got going on. And that's where I don't want to discourage young men. That's where I would say there are counterfeits, right? There were the zealots. There were counterfeits to this who wanted to break up societal norms or push buttons. With sinful motivations. And again, getting back to wisdom to say, no, there are appropriate times where God's calling people to take risks in his name and in ways that's going to irritate people, in ways that's gonna ruffle some feathers. And so I get kind of the concern that you're talking about, where people are maybe being brash or overly abrasive just for the sake of doing that stuff. But there are good high things that Christ is calling these young people in our day to.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's an interesting conundrum because you don't want to do it too safe. To your point, like the protectivism that we're building into some of this is not going to be good for anybody either. Then, encouraging someone to be risky in ways that don't really reflect Christ is another problem. And so we've got to sort of figure out how to be people who take risks and are willing to be unsafe while following Jesus.
Something I've thought about with that is when you're taking a risk, like what are you risking, and what if you fail? Kind of get into that point. And when you look in the Bible, whether it's Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, things like that, where it's like our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, if you're not going to bow down and worship, and that's. I don't know, that's a little bit of machismo to say that to Nebuchadnezzar. That's not in a negative sense, but it's like, that's courageous. That was that was something. But they looked at it and, I don't know, like again, so what I imagine Andrew Tate is like. I'm like, what is that guy risking? Like, what is he putting out there? Maybe an online persona, maybe some fame, right? That's what he's gambling with, or that's what he's negotiating with, and kind of the shocking things that he's doing. And that's clearly just folly, right? That's clearly in that category of stuff that's just gonna, it's here and then it vanishes quickly away. But being faithful to God, not bowing down to an idol, standing up for truth, bearing witness to Christ. Again, just amazing things that we want to encourage people to do, like take a risk for the sake of loving your neighbor, take a risk for the sake of the honor of God. And then that's a win-win situation, right? Where you can say, even if this institution or this organization is gone tomorrow, it was worth it because the name of Christ is glorified.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It has to be that sort of centered on following Jesus, honoring God, serving others. And in that is going to come inherent risks. I mean, I do think that's sort of what we see, especially, I think the book of Acts is a really interesting place to look, because you do see them in danger most of the time. There's not a lot of time where they're like, oh, this is great.
Well, and another interesting connection back in the book of Daniel is that with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I think, you could look there and say what originally put them kind of on the radar was the fact that they wouldn't eat the king's diet, right? So they made a small stand for obedience to God's law, and that was kind of the first thing that they did, which was, kind of out of the ordinary. And again, you think about it's very rare that you're in an organization where every day you're making a decision that's going to affect the survival of, I hope not, right? That's going to affect your survival, right? And the same thing in our lives. We navigate physical dangers, and sometimes we have close calls with death. I almost hit a deer a couple nights ago. I wasn't going fast enough for me or the deer to die, but occasionally things like that happen. But most of the time, you're making decisions within your organizations or in your church or the ministry with your family, whatever it is, that are, again, kind of just leading you on the path of life or leading you a little bit on the path of death. And so often that's how Satan works, right? Is the little compromises more than the big ones.
Well, I'm wondering, maybe last question here, and then we'll sure close this out. But, you talk about putting safety in its place, and I guess I'm wondering where you think that is. We people with maybe a little practical understanding of how to think about safety in Christian perspective.
Yeah, putting safety in its place. My temperament was to, when I was younger, it was to be cynical of kind of safety procedures like this. We're just kind of doing this to please someone or something like that. And with age, I've come to say, no, physical safety is a good thing. You look at how much God cares about that. And so on that level, we want to have a high view of safety, the value of human life. We want to do what we can to relieve the suffering of other people. That's so much of Christ's ministry, is he heals people. He comes to people who are suffering and brings them out of it. And but in putting safety in its place, Bartimaeus, right? What a great little story, where we know what Jesus says to his disciples. He says, "Follow me, take up your cross," right? He's pointing them towards death. And so he finds blind Bartimaeus, and it's a short little snippet, short little scene in the Gospels. And it just says that he healed Bartimaeus, and that Bartimaeus got up and followed him on his way. And that's putting safety in its place. That's saying, when Christ protects me, when he, just gives me the means to be safe, that's a gift from him. But then I instantly turn around and follow him and be willing to lay down my life for his sake and for the sake of others. And I think if you can have that in your mind, it just makes all those 1,000 little decisions on what do I let the kids do, where do I let the teenagers, how far can they drive, and all those little things that we're constantly trying to navigate. You can build an algorithm, you can have a spreadsheet, you can call an insurance company and ask them what they'd like you to do. And, right. And that just, oftentimes we're pursuing safety, but the result is it just becomes a burden to us. Yeah. And so I think we put safety in its place, receive it as a good thing. But if the pursuit of safety is sucking the life out of you, then it's not doing what it's intended to do. There's something wrong there. And we want to pursue life, and receive the safety that God gives along the way with thankfulness.
Really helpful, Jan. Like I said, I really appreciate you tackled this subject. I think it's one of those, like I said, I was really interested in it and just went a different way, but I was so happy to find your book and get to read it and interact with it. So really appreciate it. And to everybody out there, I just recommend the Pursuit of Safety by Jeremy Lundgren. I'll put the link to the book. There it is right there. If you're watching on video, you got a little flash of it. But I would just encourage you, I got the link in the description. This is an IVP book. So if you order it off IVP's website, you get a 20% off. Just put in the discount codes that they provide. And just really encourage you to take a look at this. Safety is such a big issue nowadays in our world. And, we're seeing this over and over and again. So I think this is really timely work and would just encourage you to pick it up. So again, Jeremy, thanks for being here. Really appreciated you interacting on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. I appreciate your questions.
No sweat. All right. Hey, everybody. We'll catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Take care.
Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.